What's going on, guys? I am Kadarius Washington, and y'all are checking out the Sports Rundown. And NBA free agency is officially upon us. It started yesterday evening, and we had a whole lot of moving and shaking since then. Of course, starting with the news that Michael Porter Jr. was being traded to the Brooklyn Nets for Cam Johnson, which was a trade that I really liked because the Nuggets get the older Michael Porter Jr., get that contract off the books and bring in Cam Johnson, who is a talented young player. So I like that move for Denver, who also brought back Bruce Brown, who was a fan favorite, part of that 2023 championship team. I like that move there. And then, of course, we had the news that LeBron James picked up his $52 million player option with the Lakers, and a whole lot of discourse around that, whether or not he should have picked up the option, whether the Lakers should have gotten rid of him, and whether or not this is going to be his last year. And, of course, it's a big story because it's LeBron picking up his option there. So we had that. We also had the news that the Clippers were once again lighting money on fire, giving James Harden that 2-year, $81 million extension, with Harden doing absolutely nothing but crumbling in the big moment and has done a grand whopping nothing since 2018, but that's another story for another day. And then, of course, today we got the news that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander got that 4-year, $285 million Supermax contract. Of course, the reigning league MVP and finals MVP, now getting the richest contract in NBA history. And also the big story, too, Miles Turner signing with the Milwaukee Bucks on a 4-year deal. Now, listen, that is a huge blow there for the Indiana Pacers, of course, coming off of Game 7 in the NBA Finals and now losing one of their foundational pieces and getting absolutely nothing in return for them. That is a big blow there to the Pacers. And also Milwaukee, to make room for the Miles Turner signing, waived Damian Lillard, of course, recovering from that Achilles tear right before the postseason. So we've had a lot of movement in the NBA and a lot of news coming out of there, but the NBA hasn't been the only place making news over the last 24 to 48 hours. But the WNBA, they've been making some news too. Of course, yesterday morning we get the news that the WNBA is going to be expanding once again, getting 3 more franchises by 2030, getting teams in Philadelphia, Cleveland, and Detroit. Of course, Philadelphia being the newest of the spots. And I want to believe that Dawn Staley, the coach of the South Carolina women's program, was very influential in getting a team over there. Of course, her being from Philly. And even saying if they were to get a team that she would want ownership. And also, not only just in an ownership role, but I would really love to see Dawn Staley, be the GM for this Philly team. I think that would be pretty cool to see there. And, of course, Cleveland, having the original franchise Cleveland Rockers that folded in 2003. And Detroit getting a WNBA franchise once again. Of course, winning 3 WNBA titles in the early 2000s, those great teams with Swin Cash and Bill Laimbeer. Yes, that Bill Laimbeer from the Bad Boy Pistons being the head coach over there and winning those championships. And, of course, the Shock moved to Tulsa in 2010 to become the Tulsa Shock, and then they moved once again in 2016 to become the team that we know today as the Dallas Wings. And speaking of the Dallas Wings, they made some pretty big news yesterday. Of course, we got the news that NaLyssa Smith is heading to the Las Vegas Aces for a 2027 first-round pick. Now, listen, I do like the trade for Vegas. They get help on that front court, and they get some defensive help, which has been absolutely abysmal for the team all season long. But I kind of cringe a little bit whenever I hear the words 2027 first-round pick, because of the talent that could be potentially coming out of that class. Of course, potentially getting Juju Watkins and Hannah Hidalgo, Audie Crooks, Michaela Williams, NaLyssa Wiley, to name a few. And so the Las Vegas Aces not going to have a first-round pick until 2028. But nevertheless, that was an interesting trade there. And, of course, we know the situation with NaLyssa Smith and Dejanay Carrington, that little duo there, with the team splitting them up there as far as that's concerned. Another trade-related piece of news over there, Aaliyah Edwards expected to be traded from the Washington Mystics. Of course, Edwards being their first-round pick last year, and I felt that this was kind of expected to from how the Mystics roster is currently shaking up there. So that's going to be an interesting thing to see there. And also another piece of news from the WNBA, the All-Star starters were announced. And, of course, with the voting, 50% of the vote went to the fans, 25% of the vote went to the media, and then 25% of the vote went to the players. And Caitlin Clark and NaLyssa Collier were named the captains, no surprise. And the All-Star starters, as far as the guards are concerned, Caitlin Clark, Paige Becker, Sabrina Ionescu, Alicia Gray, and then the front court, NaLyssa Collier, Asia Wilson, Brianna Stewart, Aaliyah Boston, Nneka Ogwumike, and Satu Sabali. And honestly, I like it. I think they got it right. I think they got the starters right there. Now, listen, I know a lot of people were upset about Angel Reese and Alyssa Thomas not being named starters, but they're going to be all-stars. That I am not doubting that. They are going to be in the all-star game, and, of course, you had a whole lot of talk about how the fans voted, how the media, how everybody voted, and I'm not going to get into all of that. And also another piece of quick WNBA news, of course, players returning from Eurobasket, and the Golden State Valkyries waiving Chloe Bibby and Bree Hall, which was kind of expected, of course, getting back Janelle Saloon and Timmy Fangbele and all those people over there. But a couple of surprising moves, too. Valkyries waiving Kiara Linskins and Julie Van Loo, which is a pretty good indication that they're going to be keeping Letitia Amihere and Caitlin Chen, who have done a really good job over these last few games, and good for the Valkyries. Now, listen, very bittersweet, but good for the Valkyries keeping Amihere and Chen, because if they had gotten rid of Amihere again, I was probably going to have to go on another rant. Now, look, I know they're good, and I know they're a dangerous playoff team, but it's good that they're keeping them for now. And, of course, we have a lot of smoke that Alana Rupert, who was their first selection in the expansion draft, is going to be coming over later this summer. But it's going to be interesting to see how all of that plays out in the WNBA. And then, of course, we have the Commissioner's Cup Championship game tonight. We have the Indiana Fever taking on the Minnesota Lynx. And, of course, we got the news that Caitlin Clark is out with a groin injury. She's missed the last couple of games with that. And the Minnesota Lynx trying to go back-to-back with the Commissioner's Cup. I really don't know how much of a big deal the Commissioner's Cup is as far as the WNBA is concerned, whether it relates to something like the NBA Cup, which I know the WNBA has had the Commissioner's Cup longer, but I really don't know how big of a deal it is per se, but I'll definitely be into it as far as the WNBA is concerned. All right, one more thing that I want to get to. Today is one of my favorite holidays, not only on the sports calendar, but also on the calendar period. Today is Bobby Bonilla Day. Yes, July 1st, Bobby Bonilla Day. And so for the people who don't know what Bobby Bonilla Day is, let me tell you this wonderful story. So in 2000, the New York Mets agreed to buy out the remaining $5.9 million that was on Bobby Bonilla's contract. However, instead of the Mets just paying Bobby Bonilla the $5.9 million all at one time and the thing being over with, the Mets agreed to make annual payments of approximately $1.2 million every year on July 1st for 25 years from 2011 until 2035, including a negotiated 8% interest. Now, look, at the time, the Mets owner, Jeff Walden, I believe his name was invested in a Bernie Madoff account, but that thing turned out to be a Ponzi scheme and a pretty embarrassing failure. And listen, Bobby Bonilla has not played for the Mets since 1999 and has not played baseball since 2001. Bobby Bonilla is 62 years old, and he's going to be 72 in 2035 when the last payment is paid out. But every year, July 1st, he gets his $1.2 million, and this has really served as a foundation piece for a lot of players now in the present day getting deferred payments as far as their contracts are concerned. So, Mr. Bonilla, go ahead and get your money, sir. Like, comment, subscribe, click that notification bell to be notified of when I post again, and also follow me on Twitter and on Bluesky at CW Talk Sports, CWTALKS Sports, and I will see y'all the next time. Peace.